Hello and welcome to another Brexit crisis special. I'll ask the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sajid Javid, why he won't tell us the cost of Boris Johnson's Brexit. I'll ask the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, why Labour seems so scared of an election. Anushka Asthana is here.
I'll be crunching the numbers and looking out for your reactions, so get in touch on Twitter or Instagram at ITV Peston.
And still not dissolved, our Parliament of the Superstars. Labour's Lisa Nandy, who wants some kind of Brexit. A Tory exiled by Johnson, Dominic Grieve, who wants another referendum on all of this. And the Tory Mark Francois, who's literally gagging for Brexit. Watcher, well, it should have been a week of celebration for him because he got a new Brexit deal from EU leaders in the teeth of almost universal scepticism, but then it all started to go horribly wrong, in part because he alienated Arlene Foster's Northern Ireland party, the Democratic Unionist Party. They turned against him in a series of vital votes, and on Saturday, Boris Johnson was forced to eat his words and ask for a 3-month Brexit extension. And yesterday, his plan to ram Brexit legislation through Parliament, through the Commons, in just 3 days, was also rejected. There's a fig leaf covering his embarrassment, which is that MPs did at least give a sort of blessing for his deal in what's known as a second reading vote. But Boris Johnson can't govern, and he says he wants a general election, but although he can't govern, this man, Jeremy Corbyn, won't give him a general election. So we are a bit like Winnie the Pooh, totally stuck. Aren't we, Anushka?
I think things have taken a strange turn, Robert, when you're quoting Winnie the Pooh. I want to show you how volatile things have become through the betting odds that are fast changing. This chart that I showed you on Sunday shows you which could come first, Brexit in green or an election in purple. And back then, on Sunday, Brexit was looking good. Then that timetable vote and briefings from Downing Street sources, and this happened. All the money shifted to an election first, but they need opposition parties to back one. And not all senior Tories want an election. Some think they can get Brexit done with a short extension because, as you were saying, Robert, MPs voted for the withdrawal agreement bill from 329 to 299. But this was only to get to the next stage in Parliament, and that majority of 30 includes some MPs who have major reservations about the deal and may not vote for it in the end. So Tory strategists will be particularly interested in this group. MPs who voted for the deal but against Johnson's timetable. There are 21 of them, and Johnson cannot afford to lose more than 15. So what are they thinking? Well, if we look at a couple of former Tories, Antoinette Sandbach and the former Chancellor Philip Hammond, she's told me that she would support an amendment for a confirmatory referendum. Philip Hammond wants MPs to have a firmer say in the future trade deal and on extending transition. He and others will be likely to vote for the deal if they get those reassurances. The other bigger group you can see here, Labour MPs, including our guest, Lisa Nandy, Melanie On, Gloria De Piero. They represent Leave constituencies. They want a deal, but a softer one than this. They voted for it so Parliament could discuss it, and we'll be looking at things like a customs union amendment. If that falls, it'll be very difficult for them, and it could come to a head very soon if French President Emmanuel Macron gets his way and limits any extension to 15 days. Robert.
Thanks, Anushka. Well, I'm delighted to be joined by my distinguished guests. I'm going to start with a really easy question for all of you, which is we have a government which patently can't govern, but it also can't get a general election. Lisa Nandy, Labour. I'm going to start with you.
What's the question?
What is going to happen?
Well, I don't know what is going to happen, but I can tell you what I think should happen.
Right.
I think we should agree a timetable for this bill. I know that Labour has made an offer to the government of what we would consider to be reasonable, and we should start getting into committee stage.
And that would be finishing everything, what, by the middle of November?
Yeah, so my understanding was that we'd offered somewhere around 5 or 6 days of debate and scrutiny in the Commons, and that then we would get into that committee stage where you have to start making hard choices about what you can get a majority for in Parliament. It would enable us to test out the customs union that Anushka talked about. It would enable us to test out a second referendum for those people like Dominic who want one, and then we would have to finally decide, is this a good enough bill? Is this a good enough deal? And if it isn't, my own view is that we need to go back to the country in a general election and ask the people to make a choice between what are basically two competing visions on offer for Britain.
Now, Mark Francois, Conservative MP from the sort of Spartan Brexit wing of the party. Today, one of President Macron's ministers said in the National Assembly that as far as she was concerned, she seemed to be speaking for the President, there ought to be a short extension, a technical extension perhaps of 15 days, which would actually marry with what Labour say they want in order to get this deal through. If the EU offers that, they probably won't, they probably will offer 3 months, but if the EU were to offer a short technical extension simply to get the deal through, should Boris Johnson take it?
Well, I would still much prefer we leave at Halloween because that's what the country has been led to expect. However, if it's too difficult to do that, then if there were a short extension, but very specifically, directly for the purpose of finishing the legislation, then I suppose that's not completely unreasonable. You asked what will happen. Well, we do know what has happened. And very importantly, what has happened is the House of Commons has voted for a deal. The bill is there to implement the withdrawal agreement, and the second reading of a bill means do you agree in principle with the bill, and then you do all the hard detail in committee. So the Commons has voted by a majority of 30, and given some of the votes we've had recently, that's quite a big majority, in fact, for the bill to implement the deal. So very importantly, the Commons has agreed the deal in principle, and if we needed a bit more time just to work through the final details, maybe that's not unreasonable. I'm still a Halloween man, as it were.
Sure, but you wouldn't. But broadly, you wouldn't die in a ditch, as it were, for the 31st if it was the 15th of November.
But to be clear, if that extension was absolutely, purely and simply to complete the legislation, then I think that's not unreasonable.
That is a bit optimistic, to be honest, because I voted for this bill at second reading along with a number of Labour colleagues, and we voted for the principle of leaving the European Union with a deal. That's what this bill seeks to do. We didn't vote for the vision that's on offer in this current bill, and that's where it's going to get...
So I suppose that's what I want to ask you, Dominic. That we just heard from Mark Francois that, you know, he thinks Parliament would get something through that is recognisably like what Boris Johnson has put to the Commons. Is that reasonable? Because I think Boris Johnson's great fear is actually, if he allows debate to go on, what he will end up seeing is something that's nothing like what he actually wants.
That's something which any Prime Minister risks with legislation. This is a major constitutional bill. It's going to govern the way this country runs itself during the period of transition. It has major issues for Northern Ireland. It needs a reasonable amount of time to pass. I agree with Lisa. I think about 6 days in committee is probably the minimum. All this should have been sorted out before there was this sort of strange hissy fit by the Prime Minister yesterday. It was inevitable that the Commons was going to turn down doing it in 3 days because it turns us into a rubber stamp. Now, as it goes through, it may go through. I agree with Mark. There has been an in-principle acceptance that this is a framework which might be all right. But as it goes through, it will be explored, and certainly there can't be a guarantee it won't be changed in a way the Prime Minister doesn't want. There's no guarantee that at third reading it might not be rejected by the House of Commons. But there is at least an opportunity to deal with this.
Well, look, tons of stuff to pick up on with all three of you in just a moment. A little earlier this evening, I spoke about that sort of stuff and other stuff as well with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sajid Javid. But I started by pointing out to him that the Prime Minister's official spokesman this afternoon told journalists that the budget on the 6th of November was likely to be cancelled. Really? I asked him.
There will be a budget. The budget's on track. And as I said at the time when I announced the date, November the 6th, the only situation there won't be a budget is if there was actually a no-deal outcome. Now, we can't rule that out at this point, but we're on track to have a budget on the 6th.
Oh, because that's not what journalists, and I wasn't in the lobby briefing, but in the lobby briefing, journalists took away from it that the fact that there may not be a deal, but there may be a delay, could persuade you not to do the budget. But you can say categorically that, you know, the only circumstances in which there won't be a budget would be a no-deal Brexit.
Yeah, the budget date remains the 6th. And when it comes to Brexit, we are working as much as and as hard as we can to make sure that we still do that on the 31st of October, despite what happened in Parliament yesterday.
What is the route at this stage, though, for there to be a deal by the 31st of October? We're out of time.
You know, I think it's just worth recalling when the new government came into office, some 3 months ago, and Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. Everyone said, you're not going to be able to reopen this agreement. You're not going to be able to get rid of the backstop. You're not going to be able to reach a new deal. And we delivered on all three. And then they said, OK, you've got a deal, but you're not going to be able to get this deal through Parliament. And it's just worth reflecting for a moment what actually happened in Parliament yesterday. I mean, the good news was, for the first time in 3.5 years, this government, any government, but this government achieved getting an agreement on a Brexit deal. But then Parliament decided to delay the deal. We can get it done by the 31st. We put together, yes, admittedly an aggressive timetable, but a perfectly deliverable timetable to get this deal done by the 31st. And, and just when there was a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, we could see the light, Labour decided to extend the tunnel. That's what happened yesterday.
But look, 110 pages of complex legislation. It's not unreasonable for MPs to ask for a few more days. What is the magic with the 31st of October? If you can get your Brexit deal a few days later, why not delay a few days?
You go out there to the country, get out of Westminster Village. This is what I say to fellow MPs as well. If you get out of Westminster Village, talk to the real people out there, and they are sick and tired of Brexit being delayed and delayed and delayed. They want Brexit done. We had a deadline, October the 31st.
But
they
Charles,
want that delivered.
You, like me, talk to these people, and, most of them, as you say, want the uncertainty ended. Not all of them want Brexit, but they want the uncertainty ended. And those who do want exit say to me, actually, they don't care whether it's a few days later. So what's the fixation on the 31st of October?
It is. You talked about the size of the bill, the legislation. Yeah. It is perfectly possible for Parliament to work hard, digest the legislation, vote on it, put forward any amendments they want, and let Parliament consider that and get it done. And you know what? We're still going to be trying to get this done by the 31st. And if that means we have to sit on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, sit every hour of the day, that's what we need to do to deliver on the 31st and not have any more dither and delay.
So does that mean that you will resubmit a programme motion and try and force MPs to sit Friday and Saturday the next couple of days, as it were?
I think, to be fair, I think first we have to hear from the EU, because Parliament has asked the EU.
But if we're not going to hear from the EU till Friday, and that's what Downing Street appears to believe, then, we've literally got, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we're out. Done.
Well, I think...
and since you can't... Actually, we're not out, is the point, because, of course, 31st of October, Parliament has already basically made it impossible for you to get a no-deal Brexit on the 31st. It's done. It's over.
Well, first of all, let's remember a no deal can still happen. So we're going to carry on planning. We're going to still carry on working on that possibility, potentially, because it's not in our control. It's up to the EU, depending on how they respond to
do you really, in your heart, believe the EU will not grant an extension, which the Benn Act says you have to take?
I think that, now that the EU has been asked, they are properly considering it. It's up to them. I'm not going to speculate on what they're going to do, and we will hear from them, I'm sure, shortly. In the meantime, the Prime Minister is speaking to his EU partners and making it clear that we're not interested in a delay. We should still be working hard towards leaving on the 31st, and that will be our plan. Now, if the EU does offer an extension, we'll have to respond to it at that time, but it should be clear to the British people, it is this Parliament, not the government, that has asked for a further delay.
Now, as Chancellor, the interests of business are obviously paramount to you. A lot of Northern Ireland businesses are not just concerned about the admin burden of getting goods in from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, but, they've seen now what's in the bill, that they will, here it is in the government's own writing, that they will have to provide information electronically to sell from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. How could any Tory actually back that kind of admin for businesses?
So, Robert, let me answer that. A few weeks ago, I went to Belfast and I had a round table with lots of different Northern Ireland businesses represent different sectors. One of the first things that they told me, and I went to listen, was about the importance of the border in the island of Ireland, that north-south border, and how important it is, not just commercially to them, how they currently do business, but also socially and in terms of keeping peace on the island of Ireland, which is in everyone's interest, whether you're a business or not, in everyone's interest. Now, what you've just referred to in this deal that we struck, which we managed to get rid of the backstop, but reach an arrangement where the whole of the UK, including, of course, Northern Ireland, leaves the EU together. We have a single customs territory for the whole of the UK, but Northern Ireland will have a special arrangement with the EU, and the purpose of that arrangement
is that it's effectively following Brussels rules forever.
Well, no, the purpose of that arrangement is to recognise that Northern Ireland is special. That north-south border is special, and no government, no right-minded government would jeopardise the hard-won peace on that island, and that is why you have to have these special arrangements.
So you're saying that the concerns of Northern Ireland's DUP, your partners in government, they just don't matter? Those concerns don't matter?
Look, I'm not saying that at all. They're entitled to their concerns, of course they are, and during the course of, if we get this bill restarted in Parliament, they can look to see what change they might want to make, and if
but
that makes
they're wrong,
it more comfortable.
Is what you're saying.
No, I think what I would say to them and others is that what's really important here is democratic consent. And these arrangements that you refer to would automatically expire after 4 years unless the people of Northern Ireland, through their elected representatives in their assembly, decide to renew them. And that's hugely important. So it's a choice for the people of Northern Ireland. But we as a country, as the UK, we're leaving together.
Now, I do just want to show you some of the government's own figures on the impact of the Brexit deals that we've been considering. Anushka.
Thanks, Robert. Sajid Javid has declined the opportunity to provide his own economic analysis of Boris Johnson's deal. So the next best thing are these figures from government officials from 2018 that model different forms of Brexit. I assume you trust government officials. They did a look at two types close to Theresa May's deal, and you can see that the cost to the economy of new trade barriers was between 2% and just under 4%. But the free trade agreement closest to Boris Johnson's deal had a hit of over 6%.
So, Chancellor, why are you backing a deal that would make us relatively poorer than Theresa May's deal?
Well, again, I'm really pleased I've come onto your show and you've asked me these questions, because the first thing is actually to clear a few things up. There's a bit of confusion around this. So I'm being asked by some MPs saying, where's your sort of economic analysis, your impact assessment, right? What we're asking Parliament to vote on, what we asked Parliament to vote on yesterday and got through in that second reading, was the withdrawal bill.
Sure.
And the withdrawal bill is about the terms of our withdrawal. So it covers things like citizens' rights, the budget with the EU, and the sort of withdrawal arrangements, including that special arrangement for Northern Ireland. We've provided a full impact assessment on that. We were always going to provide an impact assessment on that. That's what we're voting on. Now, if I want to just turn to what Anushka has just kindly put up there on the screen for us, and it says FTA/Boris deal.
Yeah.
That is from a November analysis.
Sure.
And the FTA that was modelled there was a generic, what you might call like an average FTA.
Sure.
With all
Free
sorts
trade
of
agreement
assumptions.
for viewers out
Yes,
there.
that's right. And it is no way represents what you've called the Boris deal.
So that's just straightforwardly wrong in your opinion.
It's different. It's not about whether it's wrong or right. It's just not representing the deal. And I'll tell you why. Because what we've agreed with the EU in what's called the Future Economic Partnership is what I would refer to as a deep, best-in-class free trade agreement, which is far more ambitious about what's represented up there on things like data exchange, on tariffs, on energy, on financial services.
Just to be clear, most people say you actually haven't agreed anything because the whole point about the political declaration is it's subject to negotiations after we leave. But if you have agreed this deep and special partnership, which is way better than that deal there, why haven't you showed us the impact on the economy?
Because what we're voting on in Parliament now are the withdrawal arrangements, and we provided a full impact assessment.
But this is really... But this is quite... But hang on, but this is quite important.
Let me finish. And then
Please do.
Of course. But then what happens next? And as we set out in Parliament, once you get this withdrawal agreement through, once we've actually left, then we start the proper sort of detailed negotiations with the EU. We have already agreed through this withdrawal bill a clause that says that Parliament would have to sign off on the negotiating mandate. And also, let's remember, this free trade agreement, any future arrangement, needs to be ratified and signed off by Parliament. So there'll be all bits of information we will provide at the right time.
But just to be clear, what you have just said explicitly is that those parts of the Brexit deal which relate to the future relationship with the EU are just not binding at all. So how, for example, on that basis, can you remotely persuade any Labour MPs to come and support you, given that also part of that future agreement are the things that they want, such as, workers' rights being protected or environmental standards being... You're saying all of this is basically worthless, because if it wasn't worthless, we would have an impact assessment.
I'm not saying at all it's worthless. The political declaration is hugely important. The future economic partnership that we've agreed is hugely important. But remember, it's worth just stepping back a bit and thinking back to when the UK government enacted what's called Article 50, the process of leaving. It was the EU at that time that refused to negotiate the withdrawal along with the new arrangement and to make that new arrangement binding. So this has been the case all along. It would be the case if Labour had somehow tried to negotiate. So it is always the case that the future arrangement needs further negotiation. And can I also just say this, Robert? There are some parliamentarians, not all, but some of them, that they say, oh, I want this kind of economic analysis. I want you to do this. The reality is, for some of them, they won't be satisfied by any kind of analysis because they're not interested in an analysis. They're interested in denying the will of the British people, and that's their only motivation.
So, unfortunately, we're almost out of time. If I could just ask you two very quick questions. Borrowing, as you know, is running about a fifth higher than your official forecasters expected it to be, largely because of increased public spending. You've made some pretty significant public spending commitments in the last few weeks. Is there any scope at the moment for tax cuts?
Well, I'm not going to... You're tempting me on the future budget, but...
No, I'm asking for your judgment, really.
So my judgment so far, first of all, what I've done is, first of all, I recognise, because of the hard work of the British people, what this government has achieved, especially since 2010, is that public borrowing is under control. It is something like 1/10 of what it was, the deficit, when we first took office back in 2010. I have consciously decided to spend more on what I call the people's priorities, on more police, on better healthcare, on our schools. And when it comes to the budget, I've also said this, and I've been quite open about it. I think that with interest rates where they are now on government debt, where we can borrow in real terms and negative interest rates, it makes sense to
borrow
use
for investment, but not for day-to-day spending.
No, but for investment. No, for day-to-day, I agree with you.
But it means there cannot be any money at the moment for tax cuts.
I think wait for the budget. Wait for the budget.
But you're steering me away from that judgment.
One thing I will tell you about the budget, because I like you and I want to share information with you, is I will be focusing a lot on infrastructure, because that is for investment, and we need more economic infrastructure in this country.
And very final question, because we are out of time, unfortunately, but the Governor of the Bank of England, probably with you, the most important economic player in the country, he is due to step down at the end of January. There's no sign of a new governor being appointed. Are you going to have to ask him to stay on longer?
Well, actually, the appointment process is on track. And if you're going to ask me who I'm considering, I'm not going to say. I will say. I'm not giving anything away, but I think I can tell your viewers that you're not being considered for the job only because you didn't apply.
That's a disappointment and shock.
It's fully on track,
which means we'll know
this autumn.
Quite soon, the next week or two.
I'm not going to say next week or two, but
in the autumn.
It's on track in the autumn.
Fantastic. Great to see you as always.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
So, quite a lot to chew over with my distinguished trio of MPs. Mark, if I could just start with you. There you had your eminent colleague, Sajid Javid, the Chancellor, broadly saying the DUP are wrong to be concerned about these special arrangements that the Prime Minister has agreed, which effectively, many would say, keeps the Northern Ireland in the customs union and the single market, maybe not by law, but certainly by practice. You can't be comfortable about that, can you?
Well, I've always personally respected the DUP. I'm friends with a number of them. And some people think they have unfashionable views on some issues. Personally, I don't agree with that. But one thing we forget, Robert...
But they kept you in power for the last couple of years, and you've abandoned them, haven't you?
Well, hang on. I was just going to say, you know, a lot of people forget, certainly in the earlier years of their political careers, I mean, these people had to look under their car every morning before they went to work. We have no conception of what that's like.
Sure.
A lot of these people are quite physically brave to have gone into politics in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. So I've always respected them.
Absolutely. So why are you supporting a deal that they hate?
Well, I hope that we can actually, when we look at the future trading arrangement, the free trade arrangement that will follow on, that there might be some way in those negotiations of satisfying concerns which they clearly hold very close to their heart. So I hope as we look forward to the free trade deal, there might be some flexibility there and we can actually give due weight to the concerns of the DUP.
Dominic, I can see you want to come in.
Yes, Clause 13.8 of the protocol we're being asked to accept makes absolutely clear that Northern Ireland will not be able to benefit from any free trade arrangement unless the EU agrees to it, and it is locked into a separate economic system for good. Unless it can come out of it if there's a majority vote in both communities in 4 years' time, but that still wouldn't enable them to benefit from the FTA. So in practice, the leverage that the EU has over Northern Ireland's future is very considerable indeed. And I'm sorry, you can make arguments about the Northern Ireland issue, but ultimately the Prime Minister has abandoned them and he's broken very specific promises which he made to the DUP. They may have been foolish promises. He's a man who makes an awful lot of them. But the simple fact is that he has broken them, and it's not surprising that they're very upset.
Lisa, I'm going to come back to you later on all of this, but I'm delighted now to be joined by John McDonnell, Shadow Chancellor. Lots of people watching don't understand why Labour doesn't want a general election now.
Because we're trying to abide by our own manifesto commitment, which was to respect the referendum. So we accept that the government has the right and the ability to bring forward legislation to that effect. We couldn't support this legislation, but in particular, we couldn't support the way the government wanted Parliament to handle it, to rush it through Parliament. So what we've done today, Jeremy Corbyn met Boris Johnson, and our Chief Whip has met with the Chief Whip of the Conservative Party to say, look, let's compromise here, let's agree a proper timetable, a programme motion.
And just be so Lisa was saying that she thinks that what you offered was, I think it's sort of 6 to 8 days for the Commons, which would take us to the middle of November. Is that right?
I wasn't in the discussions between the two.
But does that sound about right?
Roughly
that essentially it would all be wrapped up by the middle of November?
Well, it's trying to look at what sort of timetable we've used in the past for this sort of legislation. Usually it's a lot longer, but we're just trying to be reasonable and say, look, we heard what Parliament said last night. This bouncing it through like this isn't going to work. Why don't we have a proper timetable, allow amendments to come forward, have a proper debate, and then at the end of the day, let Parliament decide. And I don't think that's unreasonable, and I actually think it's something that Parliament would support.
But, I mean, what Boris Johnson would say is that all this would do would be to give you the opportunity to effectively wreck his deal.
It would give Parliament the opportunity to amend it. It's the point that has been made by Dominic. Any government seeking to legislate always has that risk that Parliament will want to amend the legislation. And in this, all MPs were asking for last night is the usual practice of having time to debate and scrutinise, and to bounce that sort of scale of legislation through within 17 hours was ludicrous. But also the ability just to move amendments. And, you know, it's interesting, there's lots of cross-party work going on here where I think you could see the opportunity for agreement.
But his view would be that there are only two things that Labour's interested in. One is a referendum, and the other might be a customs union, and he would be opposed to both of those.
That's fair enough, but that's for Parliament to decide, and he should trust Parliament and have confidence in our democratic system. We've put forward our own ideas. Customs union is one, close single market relationship, which actually Theresa May was moving towards.
But you'll never vote for it in the final third reading unless there's a confirmatory referendum, will you?
It might.
It's inconceivable, isn't it?
Let me just finish
Given
the
your
points
policy.
off, Robert, so
Yeah,
you know
sure.
where I'm coming
Sure.
from. It is about dynamic protection in terms of workers' and environment and consumer rights. And, yes, the proposal will come forward for confirmatory vote. But, look,
But can I ask you a very specific question on this? Is it, given your policy now in favour of a confirmatory referendum, is it remotely possible for Labour to support any version of this deal without a confirmatory referendum?
We'd have to see how the debate goes on, but I think there's a...
So seriously, you could allow this bill...
Well,
if you've got any control over it, you could allow this bill to go through without a referendum attached.
I think that's one of our bottom lines, but we'd have to see what Parliament decided. And it could well be that could lose that vote and Parliament, by a majority, could agree, therefore, to let the bill go. All people were asking for the other night is just abide by the normal parliamentary rules.
But just to be clear, some people think that, you know, in a way you and Jeremy Corbyn have been speaking with forked tongue because you had consistently said once a no deal was off the table and people read that as an extension beyond the 31st of October, at that point you would be happy to have a general election. And you're now not really saying that, are you?
No, I'm happy to have a general election whenever it comes. But
just to be clear, if the EU tomorrow or Friday says 3-month extension...
Or less.
Or less.
We could be into a fortnight, something like that.
Or whatever it is. But if they said that, would you at that point say, OK, we're fine to have a general election now?
Well, what we're trying to do is bring the country back together again. One of the ways of doing that is to accept that the government has a perfect right to bring forward legislation. Parliament also has a perfect right to see whether or not it can properly scrutinise and amend that. And we might be able to get to an agreement. In that way, at least we've got an opportunity of mending some of the rifts that there are in our society.
I'm not sure I completely understand your position, and I'm afraid, interrogate you a tiny bit more in just a couple of minutes. Don't go away. More from the Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell and my distinguished trio of MPs after the break.
Hello, welcome to The Break, #Peston. I'm joined by our friends and we're going to be doing Brexit Pictionary, right? So what I need everyone to do, one by one, starting with me, is to draw the things that have helped you cope with Brexit. And the rest of us have to guess what they are. So I'm going to start. You ready? I'm going to do a quick 2-1, right? Here we go. That and that. You can guess what they are.
Your baby.
Babies, yes. All of them, obviously.
Love of wine.
Wine.
Yay! OK, right.
Boom.
Here we go. Right, you ready?
Yeah.
Who wants to go first? Lisa? Here you are. Let me give you a pen. Right, you're up. We've got to
Okay.
guess it.
Am I allowed 2?
Yeah? And just lean away from the screen so we can see you. And that's a baby as well?
No, it's not a baby. It's not a baby. Although I do like my baby, but
Smiley.
It is. That's right, Dominic. It is.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to come round here so you can see?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. Not
Can we get the camera in the middle? Shoes.
No, trainers. Trainer. I go running.
You go running and it makes you happy.
I spend time with nice people.
Oh, that's good. All right, Dominic, you're up. Just make sure you step back a bit so the camera can see.
I think they're quite good trainers.
Skiing?
A mountain. Go walking in the mountains.
Walking.
Oh, there you go.
Oh.
You've got no head.
That is a very good one.
No, I put a head with a smiley on it.
Very good picture of himself. All right, we got it.
We got the X-Ax as well.
Mark Francois.
Right, come on, Mark.
Okay, make sure we can see it.
Have I got a pen? Yeah.
Yeah, you got a pen, yeah. Running. And nice people, walking.
Okay. There's a
Pint.
pint.
Well, yeah, he's honest.
You're not
isn't he?
supposed to tell us. It's a guessing game.
Sorry.
Is that it? He's a pint. What else? There's something else here.
You must do something healthy.
No, this is going to worry you.
Cricket bat.
Oh, goodness.
Okay,
No, it's
no,
a bottle of wine, isn't it?
This is going to worry you.
Wine and beer.
OK, no.
Together at the same time.
No, you won't get this one, I'll have to tell you.
Bring it back.
No.
A bottle of whiskey.
30 years ago, yeah, I paid 100 quid at a function for a bottle of scotch signed by Margaret Thatcher, and I've been saving it for a special occasion. No, I've never drunk it. I've been saving it for a special occasion, and I'm going to drink that when we've left the European Union.
The bottle of whiskey.
The scotch, and then fill it with tea afterwards, and no one will know that.
Brilliant work. Thank you all very much.
Welcome back. Labour's John McDonnell is still here, but first, Anushka.
Thank you, Robert. We know that Labour have received criticism for not taking a firmer position on Brexit. Passionate Remainers, in particular, want them to be more Remainy. And the Lib Dems were taking advantage of that today. Let me show you a tweet from Jim Pickard about the leader, Joe Swinson, asking Boris Johnson if he'd like to show his gratitude to the 19 Labour MPs who voted for the deal, and also to Jeremy Corbyn for meeting through with the PM. The Prime Minister did thank those MPs, and already we are seeing pre-election posters being circulated that show how Labour could potentially be squeezed. Here we go. Let's have a look. This is the Lib Dems. Already, Corbyn's Labour has bailed out Boris Johnson. And let me just show you the Tories to show the other side of it. Boris's new Brexit deal passed Parliament, but Labour have now voted to delay it. I also want to show you one quick tweet from a viewer that has come in while we've been on air in response to those economic figures that we showed. This is Felix Obel, who's from Leave Means Leave in Wales, and he argues basically that Peston, I think that's you, Robert, needs to appreciate that Brexit was always about more than economics, that people voted for a self-governing, independent Britain. Robert.
Thank you, Anushka. And in fact, just in reply to Felix, I've consistently said that for many people, Brexit was about far more than economics.
Yeah,
obviously, it is, but I think economics, as we can all agree, is also part of this. I don't want to dwell too long on this whole issue of when the election is going to come, but I do slightly want to nail you down on this. If it looks as though this bill is lost, but if there is an extension, OK, will Labour at that point allow this to be settled in a general election before Christmas? That is the question that many people want to know.
We're hoping, step by step, hoping we can get some agreement with the government.
But if you can't?
If we can't, we're up for an election for whenever it comes.
So even before Christmas, you are up?
If necessary. But to be honest, what we're trying to be the adults in the room. We've got the Liberals on the one hand who are, I think, putting themselves in quite an extreme position. We've got some elements within the Conservative Party who are arguing no deal, no matter what, that's the way forward. I think there is an element of adults in all political parties now who think let parliamentary democracy do its job, let's look at this legislation, give it time to be properly scrutinised and considered, give it time to be amended and see whether or not we can arrive at a situation where, from my point of view, with a number of amendments to the legislation, we could get a situation, again, that's something that we can maybe put back to the people in a confirmatory vote. In that way, we could bring the country back together again.
And can I just, last question on this. Do you think it is more or less likely that we will see an election before Christmas?
Can't tell. I've given up.
You genuinely don't know?
I've given up predicting these things. And there's, in terms of the government, from what we know today, coming out of various leaks and sources, there's quite a deep split within Number 10 between Eddie Lister, one of Boris's advisors, who I've known for maybe 30 years, and Dominic Cummings, who at the meeting today we heard between Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson was slapping the table. He got a bit out of control in it, as he does. I think most probably wiser heads will be able to calm.
I mean, the
things
interesting
down
question is, though, was we were talking to Mark, Lisa and Dominic about is whether if the EU were, I mean, they may offer 3 months, but if they were to offer a couple of weeks, whether the Prime Minister would take that, which might allow you to get your timetable. But then there is always a question at the end of the, if you don't agree, what then? Is it a no-deal Brexit then? I mean,
then we're into a general election. That's the point that Lisa made. But I think you've got to give Parliament a reasonable opportunity to try and get a deal that we can all agree with. And for many of us, the components of that deal are nearly there.
Now, can I just ask, Lisa, on the second reading, walked through a different lobby from you. She backed the deal at second reading. How serious a breach of discipline is that?
We have what...
I'm watching you, John.
I know. I always... Look, you're talking to someone who most probably rebelled more than any other Labour MP throughout that new Labour period. I always think of it you have what I think I've always described as a respectful whip. You respect that people will have, on some issues, fundamental issues, have different views, and you need to take that into account. Of course, we want people to abide by the whip, but there are some issues where you have to have an element of respect there.
And just to be clear, therefore, you don't agree with your NEC colleague, John Lansman, that... Actually, you're not on the NEC, I don't think, are you?
No,
you're not. So you should say your Labour colleague, John Lansman, that people like Lisa should be thrown out. You don't agree with that?
No, look... We're in a situation now, I think, where we're trying to bring people together again. And there's an opportunity to do that now. There might be some fundamental agreements on some of the amendments we're putting forward, like the confirmatory vote. But I think, actually, we could change the atmosphere. The atmosphere out there is pretty nasty at the moment. And if we can demonstrate in Parliament that we can work together, change the climate, stop the table slapping by Cummings and others, I think that could be reflected in society as well.
Now, talking about people like Dominic Cummings, who some people think are really in charge in the government, with Carrie Murphy moving out of the leader's office, are you enjoying being back in charge?
Look, see, you're classic journalism. You're better than that, Robert. Carrie's working.
No, I'm really not better than that.
Carrie's working. Carrie, we've tweaked her into Southside. Carrie's moving into Southside. She's working directly to me on the election campaign itself. And early to this evening, I've come from a meeting with her, and it's working well.
And just, you did say to Alistair Campbell, who is actually not a member of the Labour Party at the moment, although I think he'd quite like to be.
I invited him back.
You have invited him back.
Well, I have, but I'm not sure if he's even applied.
But very quickly, you said to him that if the election, when it comes, is lost by Labour, you and Jeremy Corbyn would stand down. That was very categoric.
No, what I said is that we're going to win the election. We'll have a majority Labour government. But then people say, well, what if you lose? I always give a straight answer.
I know you give a straight answer, so I just want to check that you're not going to resign.
No, I said the convention is that, but I was talking on behalf of myself, not for Jeremy. He can talk for himself. That's the convention. But what they didn't report when it was reported is I was quite clear. We're into a general election. I'm confident we can win it. What I want is a majority Labour government. I do not want a hung parliament. I do not want a minority government. I want a majority Labour government. That's what we'll get whenever the election comes.
And very briefly, I think it's another naughty question. Unprompted, you mentioned Angela Rayner as a possible successor. Does that mean she's your favourite to succeed?
I said there's a range of women. I want a woman to be the next leader of the Labour Party. There's a range of women: Becky Long-Bailey, Angie Rayner, Emily Thornbury, Kate Osborne. You look at them.
Lisa Nandy.
Lisa, there's a whole range of... Seriously, Lisa, we've got a shadow cabinet that's 50-50 men and women for the first time in history. We have a huge younger generation coming through, including Lisa as well, which is a phenomenal selection range we've got now.
Well, listen, on that optimistic note from you, Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell, getting ahead of myself there, I think. Very good to see you as always. Don't go away. There's much more after the break from my amazing panel of distinguished MPs.
sort that one out.
Hello, welcome to The Break. I'm joined by the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, and we have been asking you for questions for him, so we are going to go through some of them. Right, are you ready?
Yep.
Bex Roberts, what is the first thing you would do as Chancellor?
I've just met the civil servants to tell them I want an early budget, and in that budget, first thing I'll be doing is introducing a real living wage, £10 an hour.
You move into number 11 first.
No, I'm staying at home.
Oh, are you?
Yeah. I only
Don't
live
fancy it?
I live down the road in Hayes. They can use the number 11 for a homeless family.
For a homeless family?
Yeah, why not?
Really?
Yeah, why not?
Well, if you're Chancellor, you can get that on. How can you keep voters on side if you don't go for a general election? This is zesty kumquat.
Yep.
People respect those that play to win,
Yeah.
not to avoid losing.
No, let's be clear, I'm up for a general election, and I'd like it as soon as possible. But on this particular issue, we're saying to the government, let's compromise, deal with this issue in a way which I think would bring people back together, allowing people to express their views, allowing us to amend the legislation, then agree and move forward.
And then an election before a referendum.
Well, again, I'm open. I want a confirmatory vote if we can with this deal,
Okay.
but I'm not either way. But I'd prefer a general election.
OK, here we go. Worker snake. Worker snake. David Cole, if you could change one thing about the EU, Commission, Parliament, etc., what would it be?
We've got to
and
make
why?
it more open and democratic. We've got to open the doors.
Because you've been a kind of long-time critic of the EU.
I've been arguing for reforms of the EU for a long period of time. Remember, in my past life, I was Chief Executive of a local government association. I managed European funds for London overall, and it was one of the most bureaucratic and undemocratic organisations I've worked with. It's improved in recent years, but I think we should really open it up.
But wasn't there a sign before that we're not going to be able to reform it?
No, I think we can, because talking to other European colleagues, they're on the same page as us.
OK. Here we go. Should we block Facebook in the UK at the time of elections or referendums? They've proven they can't be trusted.
I worry about this. I think we need proper regulation. I wouldn't necessarily block, but I think we should regulate more effectively.
What sort of things do you see that worry you?
Fake news and the way in which Facebook can be manipulated by a whole range of organisations that haven't got our best interests at heart.
Particular dangers at election time?
Yeah, definitely.
Have we got time for one more? No. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining us, John McDonnell.
Welcome back, and here's Anushka.
Thank you, Robert. I just want to show you some polling from YouGov that's come in overnight. This pie chart that I'm about to show you shows what people's first preferences are at the moment. So 42% want Remain, 19% say they want to accept this deal, 21% say no deal, 6% down there say they would prefer a different deal. What YouGov then did was to ask each group whether MPs should vote for Boris Johnson's deal, and it compares that to the proportion of each group who wanted to see Parliament pass Theresa May's deal. So let's start with the Remainers. OK, in March, 16% of them thought Parliament should pass the deal. That has gone down 12%. They do not like Boris Johnson's deal at all. Let me show you another group now, the people who want Brexit but want a different deal. Of them, they're going in the opposite direction. In March, 39%. Now, more than half of them want MPs to pass this deal. But perhaps most interestingly of all, the no-deal group. Look at this. In March, 40% of them thought that politicians should suck up May's deal. That has gone up massively to 69% saying back Johnson. For this, Our Geek of the Week is YouGov's Chris Curtis. Robert.
Thanks, Anushka. I just overheard Lisa saying when you were doing that statistic about how no-deal leavers are saying they would want this deal if they could have it. You're saying that those are my constituents,
Well,
is that right?
I'm getting a strong impression from that group in my constituency that they would be more inclined to lean towards this deal than anything else. But obviously, people are digging in on all sides, and that's the problem. 3 years ago in Wigan, people who voted Remain were saying, look, we've lost the referendum, we need to leave with a deal. The no-deal group was saying, we'll accept a deal, we'll accept however you want to leave as long as you leave. But over the last 3 years, as we've gone round and round in circles in Parliament, people have just dug in on each side, and the Remainers now tend to say, just stop this altogether, whereas a lot of people are saying, just leave, cut all ties altogether.
Mark, can I just follow up on that with just something that John McDonnell just said? And he said if the Prime Minister were to give Parliament, let's say, till the middle of November to try and agree his deal, whatever the outcome, whether it passes or fails, at that point, Labour would be prepared to allow Boris Johnson to have his general election. Did you take that as a sort of cast-iron promise? And if you were Boris Johnson, would you deal on that basis?
Well, I didn't see him sign anything in blood, but I think that was the intimation of what he said.
And if they can give a sort of commitment that is genuinely, unambiguous on this, do you think the Prime Minister should deal?
Well, I think certainly up until now, a lot of Labour MPs, Lisa's an honourable exception, have been doing everything they can to keep us in the EU at any cost. And the problem they've got is the public have seen through it. The emperor has no clothes. The bluff is over. You keep saying, oh, we would leave, but we'll only leave with a deal. Well, we've got a deal now, so your excuse is gone. And still some of them don't want to leave. I mean, there was a recently leaked poll that said the Labour Party, their internal polling, estimated that in an early general election they'd lose 100 seats. And I think the difficulty is that turkeys don't vote for Christmas, and lots of Labour MPs are desperate not to have an election because they know that their constituents are going to wreak revenge on them for delaying Brexit.
But hang on, but normally, I may have missed it, but normally, straight talking Mark Francois, I don't think you answered my question. Should Boris Johnson do a deal with Labour on that basis?
Well, that's up to the Prime Minister. I think we would all like an early general election. I think the country's priority is to sort Brexit and leave. I think, I agree with what Lisa's saying. That's what most people want. After 3 years, they just want this done. And I know Dominic will...
So if it takes the middle of November, sort it and then a general election is what you're saying.
Get out, and then let's have a general election.
But Dominic, I now want to talk to you about this. You are now of the view, have been for a while, that there ought to be a referendum to sort this out.
Yes.
There are many on your side who are pretty pessimistic that you will be able to get Parliament to approve a referendum. Have you sort of given up on that now? Or?
No, I haven't given up on it because I happen to think it's the better way out of this, because you can offer the clear choices which are available to the electorate and they can make the decision. And I think we're in danger of continuing to go round in circles.
Can you see a majority in Parliament for this?
I can, but well, hang on. I can see it happening. Equally, I also accept it may not happen. So to be absolutely clear about it, I can see that it may not have always... If there isn't a majority in Parliament for this to happen, it can't do so. But I think there is still the possibility that it could.
So you'll fight on. All right, so very good. We've got almost no time. Quick question. Are we going to have an election before Christmas? Yes?
If we've left the European Union.
That's not quite an answer. Yes or no? Election before Christmas?
I've no idea.
I've given up predicting anything
All right,
about British
brilliant. Thanks
politics.
so much. That was a complete waste of time. Thanks for another action-packed programme. By this time next week, the general election may be announced, maybe not. Can you bear all the excitement? See you.